Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Cheryl Gomez with the study group. We'll allow a couple of minutes for folks to come in from the waiting room and then get started. As you settle in, please share in the chat your name and where you're joining from. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. We're grateful to our panelists and each of you for joining us today. We're excited for this webinar series exploring an agenda on advancing multimodal AI measurement and assessment system innovation. If this is your first time joining us in one of our sessions, the study group exists to advance the best of AI assessment and data, practice, technology, and policy, and uncover future design needs and opportunities for educational system. For our agenda today, we'll begin with a few housekeeping items and sharing some resources. We'll share context for the webinar series, and then we'll move on to our panel discussion.
Thank you all again for joining. I'm Lauren Catuli with the study group. As you settle in, you'll see people dropping their names and where they're tuning in from in the chat. Please introduce yourselves as well so we can see everyone that's in the room. We'll use the chat feature throughout our session today, so please engage with us there. You can also use the question and answer feature for our panelists who are joining us here today. And you can access all the session materials and more on a link that I'll share in the chat momentarily. The session will be recorded and shared after the webinar. If you need any tech support, you can send me a message or send me an email, which I'll drop in the chat as well.
Thanks, Lauren. We're actively publishing our Getting Smart series on advancing multimodal AI measurement and assessment system innovation. If you have a topic or idea and are interested in collaborating, we'd love to hear from you. We are also actively publishing case studies from a range of leaders in the field, including a few of today's panelists. You can find all of these on our website, as well as on the link that Lauren will be putting in the chat. The spring sessions focus on assessment system innovation and the multimodal AI era. In April, we'll explore innovating how we measure, and we invite you to register for that webinar in the link in the chat as well. Momentarily, we'll be sharing more about our panelists today, but we also want to invite you to two ARA sessions that we are preparing for. The first one focuses on advancing assessment in the service of learning, and the second one focuses on the importance of the evidence in supporting dynamic pedagogy. If you're in Los Angeles, please join us. We'd love to see you there. And then finally, we invite you to sign up to receive our weekly roundup newsletter highlighting recent developments and initiatives at the intersection of AI assessment, data research, and policy, and send us any recommended content. Now let's hear from our colleagues about the relevance and importance of today's discussion.
Easy to measure rather than what. For decades, we've measured what is easy to measure rather than what matters. Assessments act as powerful signals. They shape our priorities, influencing what is taught and learned.
And right now, we're leaving a lot of value unmeasured.
The most powerful thing an assessment can do isn't tell us where a student is showing a teacher exactly what to do tomorrow.
We must embrace broader holistic definitions of learning and its contexts. Student growth unites academic achievement with social, emotional, and metacognitive development.
We must measure complex, durable skills for the future that are currently poorly evaluated by standardized tests. We must evaluate competencies like collaboration, critical thinking, communication, perseverance, and AI literacy.
We must equip students with the adaptability and confidence to thrive in the face of uncertainty.
These strategies actually spur student agency and creative know-how instead of undercutting it.
This transformation extends to our core subjects. Next generation insights for math and language arts frame tasks in authentic, real-world contexts. When we innovate what we measure, we change what is possible. Let's commit to measuring what matters most.
Thank you, Sarah.
We'll now move to our panel discussion. Our moderator, Eric, will kick us off.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for that framing set of remarks from colleagues. As president and CEO of the study group, I'm grateful for the panelists joining this conversation. We really have the dream team that I'd want to learn from and with around these topics today. Thank you also everyone who's joining both live and asynchronously for this session. Pam, Brandy, Jack, and Laura, we're delighted to share this time with you and to learn from and with you. Thank you for your preparation for today. As you know, we'll each have 4 and not more than 5 minutes, say, of framing remarks. And then we'll dive into about 35 minutes of high velocity, high value follow-up questions and conversations amongst and between this group who are in their own ways leading measurement innovation across education. The session will wrap up with a lightning round of closing remarks from each of you. Pam, we'll hand things to you first.
Thanks so much, Eric. It's great to be with you. I think all of us know that we are right in the midst now of a disruptive revolution. Something like what Thomas Kuhn once called a scientific revolution. One reason for this is because there have been a set of foundational scientific beliefs that have undergirded our learning and workforce systems, including our measurement systems, that were based in principles that we now know to be scientifically false, some just inadequate. But today we're on the cusp of a paradigm shift in how society understands human learning and human potential. The example I'd give you is that for over a century, the bell curve has shaped how institutions assess, sort, and invest in people, from schools to workplace and certainly policy. This paradigm assumed that human abilities were distributed along a normal curve, and where a person falls on that curve was largely determined before they ever entered a classroom. And the role of institutions was to identify that person's position and allocate resources to them accordingly. The model felt intuitive, it had the weight of a lot of tradition, and it was fundamentally wrong. Converging evidence today from neuroscience, epigenetics, developmental psychology tell a much different story. That human potential is not fixed. It's not even rare. It's actually a dynamic capacity that's constructed through a person's experience, and it is abundant. The emerging paradigm rests on 2 scientific truths that change everything. That human potential is practically limitless in its scope, and that what any one person is capable of is not knowable in advance. So once we accept these scientific truths, the entire logic of tests, standardized measurement, tracking systems, early selection collapses, revealing them for what they are: self-inflicted constraints operating on a national scale. But what can replace that worldview is a shift from a culture of selection to a culture of cultivation, grounded in the conditions that allow every person to realize what they're capable of. So, holding the following three things as key scientific principles, this new paradigm changes everything. One, that human variation is the norm, not the exception, in human development and learning. Two, that skills and competencies are context-dependent structures in biological terms. They will develop consistently through experiences, environments, and most importantly, relationships. And three, that the measurement of all human skill development is about the ability to measure human change over time in ways that account for both context dependency and time. The example in Jack's work, the example of Roblox, is a rich one and a practical endorsement for what I'm saying and what's possible today. In their work, they talk about the need for an interdisciplinary team and approach towards solutions. I agree with that. Can you imagine if medicine tried to cure something in the human body or mind by only looking at the body part in question? Given the example of Roblox and the billions of dollars that have been spent on siloed efforts, we should get behind the design of interdisciplinary, context-dependent aspects of measurement. We can simulate context, not unlike Roblox does. We can use existing mathematical models that connect student to context and using emerging technologies to do that. And we can do it at scale. Harnessing the will to do this today is possible if we take full advantage of the disruption at our front door. We could produce opportunity and benefit of a lifetime to so many young people.
Thank you for setting the context for our time together, Pam. I'll turn things to Brandy.
Thanks so much, Eric, and thank you all for having me. It's a privilege to be in this conversation. So I sit on our assessment team at the Gates Foundation, and despite that, and despite the focus of this panel, I'm actually not going to talk about student assessment. I'm going to talk about how education systems can use more expansive measures, and Pam, I love what you just said about context. To really understand the context in which students are learning and how that context impacts student outcomes, and how can we ensure that that data is shared with education systems and decision makers in a way that they know what to do next. So in other words, how do we align what we measure to what we actually want systems to be able to do? So you all know that federal and state accountability systems typically emphasize academic outcome measures like state summative test scores, high school graduation rates. And those data are really important for flagging schools that need improvement, but they don't often explain why the outcomes look the way that they do or what specific actions are needed to improve them. So in many ways right now, our system is good at signaling problems, but not so great at diagnosing causes and guiding action. So our colleagues on our data team in partnership with Mathematica have developed this education and workforce framework, which has over 99 indicators. This slide here is, believe it or not, just a subset of those indicators that get at the intermediate and long-term student outcomes that matter, as well as the system conditions and adjacent conditions that also matter for understanding context. And research shows that learning conditions like measuring school culture and climate, and these inputs like we see on the left side of this Venn, do students have access to high quality curriculum and instruction, are really important drivers for understanding outcomes. And these measures can provide a clear signal about what needs to change in order to improve outcomes. As a colleague said it best, how do we measure not just the students, but the soil that they are in? And on the right side of this Venn, we are also thinking that it's important to elevate measures around post-secondary and career success, as these are the long-term outcomes that we are actually striving for. And so how can we have better feedback loops between those outcome measures and getting that back into a K-12 system so that those system leaders know how to better grow additional flowers to their full potential. So we know that these data matter, but why is it so hard to actually collect and use these data in practice? We, through a couple of our district engagement projects, have talked to district leaders, and that's what's represented in these quotes here. And you can hear there's a wide range of challenges. One, there's access. The data is fragmented. So you have your academic student outcomes data in one system, you may have your climate survey in a different system, your teacher and staff data in a different system, and those systems are not talking to each other. So how can you be able to link those data, right? That siloing creates challenges. The second challenge that we hear is around capacity. We hear this phrase a lot from district folks. We are data rich, but information poor. And so how can you go from simply reviewing the data to actually leveraging that data to drive insights? The third challenge we hear is around ownership. It's not always clear who is supposed to act on that data. So we've heard from district leaders that the data that they gather may be shared centrally within central office, but then the decision-making falls to principals who may not be given the guidance and support to interpret and act on that data. Another challenge we hear is around incentives. So policy and accountability systems really enforce a relatively narrow set of outcome measures, and anything outside of that may not rise to the level of prioritization. And then finally, how do we define school quality? We have varying definitions, everything from A through F systems to third-party ranking systems. And these different approaches don't always talk to each other and don't align, and so can create confusion both within an education system, but also externally with parents and community members. So even when we expand what we measure, these system level constraints can make it really hard to translate that data into meaningful insights and action. But I want to end on a positive and say what we're excited about. So there's a few, and this is just a small sample of projects that are on our radar that we think can help sort of push through some of these challenges. One is with MIT Blueprint Labs. The economists there are asking a really important question, which is, do widely used school quality measures that focus on test score proficiency actually reflect school quality, or are they mostly capturing the background of students who attend those schools? And what they have found is that high test scores can reflect what they call a selection bias, and that they reflect the demographics of a school and not so much the impact that a school is having. And so they are working on value-added models that isolate the contribution that schools make to student growth. Another exciting endeavor is being led by Dr. Christina Cipriano at the Education Collaboratory, where they are developing tools that measure learning environments and student experiences, but in ways that are scientifically valid and actually are useful and usable by schools. So in addition to their tools like the student emotional regulation assessment and their school climate walkthroughs, they also provide implementation supports and guides so that the folks in those schools can use those data to directly inform practice. And then the third strand of work that we are excited about is some of the direct district engagement work that we are doing, where we're hearing directly from leaders about what data they have, how the challenges they experience when they go from collecting that data to getting to insights. And so we're pressure testing ideas with various groups of districts in diverse contexts, from large urbans to very small rural districts, to really understand what it takes to shorten the distance from data collection to insight. So I will just close by saying that as we think about what to innovate when it comes to what and how we measure, expanding what we measure only really matters if it produces actionable insights that can help systems improve what they do. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brandy. Jack?
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here, everybody. I'm really happy to see so many familiar names in the chat. I wish I had time to see you all in a room. I'm Jack Buckley. I am Chief People and Systems Officer at Roblox, where I get to do lots of exciting HR things. But what I'm really happy to talk to you about today is some of our assessment work, and definitely will be quick so we can get to questions. So if you go to the next slide, for the last going on 8 years now, our team has been working both before Roblox at a startup and for about 5 years here at building game-based assessment to measure various skills necessary for success in our workplace, which is predominantly an engineering and sort of technical product and data science team. And so we have built high stakes assessment for hiring selection in for constructs like creative problem solving, for communications, for systems thinking, and most recently, what's currently in development down there in the bottom left corner is computational thinking, which we are betting obviously is very important for our workforce, but possibly for everybody moving forward in the future. We do this on the Roblox platform, which is fun because we get to use our own tools and we get to build on top of decades of investment in a game studio environment that helps us do this very quickly. Next slide. So in addition to measuring those skills for selection, we also get to do some work, not as much as I'd like, on building games to actually help improve those skills, to teach our workforce skills. This is a demo or a screenshot of a real internal sort of corporate L&D game that we have to help teach our new managers how to have tough conversations, particularly around our performance system, so our performance evaluation system. The big cat is actually my avatar. Typically, we wouldn't probably have a goofy avatar in there, but that's what I look like when I'm in Roblox. And here I am talking to an employee, delivering their performance feedback in our system and learning how to practice with that. Part of that is scripted. So it starts with a structured, set of learning objectives, and we play through that. But then we let them actually have with a bunch of different simulated employees that we use some generative AI to let you practice conversations with very difficult people or very different types of employees. So it's a chance to try that before the real thing. So the last thing, if we just go a slide, talk about sort of two challenges. Just mentioned AI. The first is, because we're building high stakes assessment, we are extremely concerned all the time, as anybody, in accountability or selection is, around different kinds of vulnerability to AI. That feels a little bit of an old-fashioned position, but we still have to, during this kind of period of transition when we're trying to figure out what to measure and how to do it, we need to make sure that what we're doing actually is picking up human skills and fairly robust to different kinds of cheating. That is a cartoon from a real internal paper where we randomly assigned recent hires to use basically any AI tools they want to take on one of our assessment tasks versus a condition where they didn't. And luckily, as design, we found that the people who use the AI tools actually performed quite a bit worse on the assessment because we were measuring things that were not in the training data, that were not easily amenable to generative AI, although they tried very hard and they threw a lot of different approaches at it. That's sort of the negative. That's the defense part, right? The interesting part is on the right is just where we are now, is trying to figure out a whole new generation of internal assessment and development around how to figure out who's actually good at using these new tools and how to find the other folks and teach them how to use them better. I actually spent all morning with our engineering leaders on exactly this topic, where we are looking at building a simulation environment and studying real employee behaviors in terms of how they, the PRs they make and how they check code in and out and use these tools, because we are finding internally that our engineers who are effective at using things like Claude Code and Cursor are about 5 times more productive than the people who aren't. And so there's a lot of interest in measuring that and figuring out why, and then making sure we can bring the other folks up to that speed. So I'll stop there and hand it back.
Thank you, Jack. Laura?
Thanks, Eric. And thank you to you and the study group and Cheryl and Lauren for setting up this awesome webinar. And thank you to my panelists. You've got a lot of really smart people here. And I like the way Pam led and then Brandy followed and Jack followed. I'm going to talk about what states are doing together to address some of these challenges. It's not perfect. It doesn't address all of them at once, but together with states, we're really trying to figure out how to implement some real shifts in the way that we measure, starting with what we measure. So about 2 years ago, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and ETS came together at a moment in time where states were increasingly building these things called portraits of a graduate, which include not just academic content, which is critical, but also the things that each of the speakers have mentioned, the things that we lovingly call durable skills, but they are the things that make us human: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, leadership, adaptability, the things that are going to become and have become increasingly important the more the world becomes AI and technologically advanced, the more important these things are. So together, ETS and the Carnegie Foundation set off to define what those durable skills are. And you can see on the right-hand side are some of the skills that we find the most important. That's not to say that other skills are also not important, but that these are the ones that really are common to most states and most predictive of success after high school. Over the course of the last year, together, the two organizations convened working groups to go 2 clicks down, not just, hey, yeah, these things are important, but what does that look like? How do learners develop those skills over time? Note that not every learner follows the same path, but through research and now moving into validation to create a set of progressions in standards world, in academic standards world, where I come from, you might call those learning progressions. We're calling them skills progressions, but they outline how young people develop increasingly sophisticated command of these skills. Now, we started with collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. Why did we start there? Well, our state partners said, hey, these are the easy, quote unquote, low-hanging fruit. They're present in every portrait of a graduate. And frankly, they're the things that the field has the most research about, or did 2 years ago. We're now embarking with Carnegie Foundation in the lead on some additional skills frameworks in AI, literacy, adaptability, creativity, and civic engagement. So that's the layer, the construct that we're trying to measure. And as Pam mentioned, it's super contextual. It has a lot to do with where students are and what their background experiences are. And what we've been able to do in partnership with 6 states is to build out prototypes of how we might measure those things, but in 2 ways. Well, I'm now moving to the left of my screen. You'll see, no, stay on that slide. Yeah, you'll see we've got the construct at the top, the skills progression. Typically, assessments are given in classrooms, or if you're taking a college admissions test, they're taken in a testing center. We're trying to change the way that we think about assessment to include not just the typical fill in the blank or short answer responses, but to think about exhibiting effectiveness at those things through performance-based tasks, number one. 2, in-class, authentic, genuine work. And then 3, out-of-school experiences and artifacts, because we know learning doesn't happen only in the 4 walls of a school, but it happens all around us all the time. And if we only look at what happens in school, we're going to miss out on a lot of the things that students are learning and developing. All of that is going to be rolled up and aggregated into meaningful insights. I think Brandy talked about the importance of insights. All of these data are only as important as the insights they create, so that young people, their teachers, and families can make sense of them and help them on their path. The one thing that's not represented on this slide is that the insights both go to the vision is that they both go to learners and their adults in the moment, but they're also building towards something called a skills transcript or a skills record that can be accepted over time by post-secondary institutions and employers to say, here is the evidence, here's a portfolio and the data that show that young people don't just have these academic skills, but they also have these durable skills. Okay, so now you can go to the next slide. What are we learning? Well, we're learning a lot. first of all, as I mentioned, we've been at this work for about 2 years, and we've been engaging with 5 states, and we are about to add our 6th state. So I'm kind of scooping ourselves, but in addition to Indiana, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Rhode Island, who have been working with us for 2 years in a co-design partnership, we are about to launch work on Tuesday in the state of Missouri. So I'm really excited about that. More to come. It's just about to launch. But in essence, what these states are doing is piloting some of the tasks that I mentioned and piloting a system for uploading and scoring authentic work. So as I mentioned, we published the first skills progressions. We have these partners. We've been piloting the 2 kinds of measures I talked about in 35 districts with over 4,000 students across the states that I mentioned, and frankly, some additional states that have districts that have expressed interest. The direct assessments, remember on the screen before, they were over on the right, are what we're calling performance tasks. They're simulations and scenarios using AI, and hopefully they're as cool as Jack's content, but they're really focused on helping learners through AI generated and AI enhanced tasks to both think through scenarios. There's one that's set in a historical context, and a student has to help a leader from 350 BC think about how to govern based on different facts. There are simulations in which a young person gets to co-construct knowledge with a partner, where they're telling a story and they're building on each other's stories. So there's both communication and listening, and presenting through critical thinking the next element of an argument or of a scenario. So there are about 25 tasks that have been piloted over the last year. We're now moving into our 3rd semester of piloting, and we are, over the 2nd semester of piloting, added this capability of uploading learner artifacts, which are actual, meaningful, authentic examples of what learners can produce. They're PowerPoint presentations. They are webinars. My daughter just did a webinar on tariffs for 10 minutes. That would be a great example of a learner's execution of both content and durable skills. So over 3,500 of these artifacts have been uploaded and are currently being evaluated by humans, and then also by AI to help reinforce the model. And then we're also building out college and career wayfinding tools, which are different in type, but really speak to the uses and purposes of opening, career and college pathways to young people. All right, I have one more slide.
And I'll exercise moderator's prerogative here. When we get to the first round question to you, we'll return to this learning and challenges.
Yeah,
slide.
this is perfect. I was just going to say that, Eric, because this gets to some of the learnings and challenges. So I'll come back to this.
Yeah, we'll come back to this.
I'm sure you're going to ask me.
Absolutely. So Pam, we'll start with you, and would love to hear some reflections on how might we measure learning context, and why is this contextual data such an essential piece of the puzzle?
I think I'm going to answer the second part of your question before the first. The first principle in human development thinking is that all skills are constructed through experience and context and relationships. They're constructed based on the goals that a person has. So I think in the presentations that we've heard so far, the emphasis that Roblox is placing and the kinds of things that Brandy was talking about reflect the fact that we have to simulate context in order to assess skills while the learner is actively producing something and doing something. Now, the other thing that's super important is that mathematical models have existed for a long time. Todd Rose wrote a whole book about this in The End of Average. Peter Molinar, John Nesselrode, these mathematical models exist to connect context and student. But now we have the emerging technologies. So what this all means is that we actually have all the ingredients we need to assess what a student can do in different contexts through performance tasks, and even with the advantages of technology, and we can do it at scale. So we have all the means that we need right now in order to be able to do this.
Love it. Brandy, Carla Evans and Scott Marion used the metaphor of turning on your headlights, your high beams in a snowstorm, that sometimes adding more data to a situation is blinding rather than illuminating. How might we measure both student outcomes and broader school context, like culture and support systems? And how might schools integrate these insights to drive real improvements?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I think you guys could tell from my presentation, I love a good metaphor. So I may be borrowing that. I would say that the good news here is that many education systems are measuring, of course, both academic outcomes and these sort of broader school culture, climate, context, condition measures. There's even some states that have those survey instruments as part of their accountability framework. But I think the challenge is exactly what you just said, Eric, in that it can be more data, right, without sort of a clear sense of how those data should talk to each other and then how to best leverage that data to inform decision making. And so it's really about sort of how do you stitch these different data points together and really see the relationship between them. And just to give a really concrete example that stood out to me personally is a district that we had engaged shared some analyses that they did looking at their climate data and their end of year state test score data. And they found that for every school that had a low sense of belonging, none of those schools had a proficiency rate higher than 30%, right? So it really sort of looking at the data in that way helped them to sort of get at, okay, we think we have this sort of working theory about what it takes for schools to improve, and not saying that's the only sort of factor that matters. But if you were to look at those data in isolation, it would be much more challenging to sort of see that relationship and figure out, okay, how do we sort of move forward from here?
Thank you. Laura, returning to learnings and challenges. And Lauren, if we could bring up that slide. Based on your work in states like North Carolina, what does it take to move skills-based measurement from intention to implementation? What are some of the biggest challenges and some of the most important insights?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked. I want to talk about North Carolina specifically because they have built a really robust system around skills that predates our work with them. Over the last 5 years, they've been implementing skills-based assessments, performance tasks, I can statements, and really doing a lot of work to train teachers. What we've learned in North Carolina is that this work does not happen at the state level alone. It's sort of obvious, but I think it's worth discussing that our success in North Carolina has been that the pilot has spread across the state, not just in one place, but now it's in 5 districts. And those districts are very tightly aligned to the state systems. So alignment matters and district leadership matters. Insights and dashboards, I think this is what, again, going back to Brandy, it's been both a challenge and an opportunity for us that we led with assessments and tasks with the goal of getting feedback and information and data around the pilot. We didn't lead with insights and dashboards, and yet those are the most important thing for district leaders and for teachers is what do I do with these data now? How do I use them to support learners? And then one final learning from North Carolina specifically is how important the authentic work is, and that without it, the system will not hold the attention of teachers and educators. The authentic work, it's meaningful and authentic, number one, but it also undergirds and makes more explicit and meaningful the work that's already happening in the classroom, which of course is exactly where it should be happening. I've got some other learnings there, but I'll stop and then come back to a few more later.
Great. We'll look forward to hearing about more state-based work soon. Jack, I have a question about whether the skills that you're measuring in the era of AI are actually orthogonal to general cognitive ability. In other words, if standard multiple choice measures of general cognitive ability have existed for a century, why is it important that game-based assessments and other efforts like that help measure and give us insights about complex skills like creativity, collaboration, systems thinking, problem solving in ways that traditional assessments don't?
Sure. So, one of the things I was glad to see when the field pivoted to using terminology more like durable skills, because the thing many people remember, we used to call these like 21st century skills, and they're 15th century skills, right? Creative problem solving, systems thinking. These are not new things that you need to be successful in many areas of life. The constructs aren't new in any meaningful sense. There are some new ways that they have to manifest, new ways that you might need to use them. But to your point, a lot of these, cognitive things are not new. The, what is, somewhat new is how to do it. And to your question, there's really two reasons that usually to use something like a game or a simulation for assessment. First is, there are some complex cognitive constructs that are just very challenging to measure in traditional assessment. One of the reasons I know that is because over the years of building these, we've always looked for every possible available, more traditional assessment to use as some kind of concurrent validity measure. So you can find creativity, pencil and paper assessments. I even found a MIT professor in the business school many decades ago who had a systems thinking pencil and paper task that we used for validation. Usually what happens is they're pretty clunky. And for some of those constructs, it's just it's a better experience for the test taker, and also you can cram a lot more interesting stuff into a game or a simulation. That's the best reason, and probably the most important reason for people in the field. The other reason is really something likely more relevant just to those of us on the corporate side, which is, unlike a state accountability system or a college entrance exam, I don't have a captive audience. Like if you decide that you don't want to work here badly enough to go through our entire selection process, you just go somewhere else. And so we need to actually, be engaging to some extent with our candidates. We assess a good 40,000 people a year across some of these different job openings, and I need to keep them in the funnel for as long as I can. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of the engagement piece, but really the most important piece is to measuring these complex constructs in a way that is, valid and reliable.
And in a world where an engineer can be 5 times as effective using an AI tool, you're finding that these other competencies actually matter for performance and contribution in the workplace?
So far, absolutely, yes. I mean, computational thinking doesn't go away. In fact, what makes you effective, what I'm seeing, what makes you effective using generative AI coding tools is a high degree of computational thinking. You need to break the problem down, put the generative part in a box, then have non-generative AI, test harness and other ways to build this loop to, see whether or not what you have to break the problem down like you would in any other aspect of computing. And so actually the skills are just as important for sure.
Thank you. To start our second round, Brandy, part of what is happening with AI is user interface innovation, that you don't need a PhD data scientist to run an elaborate query to get person-specific insights or classroom-specific insights or process insights. How are schools today struggling to use their data, and what needs to change so that measurement actually serves, informs, and enhances decision making and action?
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. It's almost as if we had a convening last week with a couple of uh, organizations that support districts, and it's like you were in the room with us because that's exactly both the tension that came up around data use, and also some opportunity that maybe there's a world in which AI could really be useful for sort of getting over the hump. But I mean, the challenges we hear are vast, right? It's everything from the data is not arriving in a timely enough manner. It doesn't align to when we need to make decisions, to it's not clear what the data is saying. It may not be at the right grain size. It's siloed, like I mentioned earlier. And so some of the things that we are hearing is like, hey, we actually need support and sort of maybe it's sort of stitching our data together, but then also getting to insights like Laura mentioned earlier. And then we've also heard even making the connection to what are the sort of next steps or what are some potential evidence-based interventions or strategies we should try. And those strategies, how do they align to our context? So folks were saying, maybe there's a world in which AI could really sort of bring all that data together. And Eric, like you were saying, sort of create an interface where you don't have to be a data scientist to be able to read all these different charts, but you can ask questions and kind of more quickly get to that interpretation and insight. And then maybe even bringing in, like I mentioned, some of the evidence-backed practices. So then you're kind of getting that full through line of, okay, here's what your data is saying, here's what it means, and here's what you might want to do next based on schools that are like yours, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and as Pam mentioned, like it seems like I agree. We have the ingredients. How can we bring it all together and really sort of get through what is a sort of persistent challenge, but I think there's an opportunity to really sort of make progress in a way that has been maybe not so clear before.
Thank you. Laura, I'd love to hear about states like Indiana or Wisconsin and what they've taught you about the promise of, an ambitious vision for AI capturing skills for the future.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to talk about those two states and then come back to the technology question. Sure. So you've mentioned states like Indiana and Wisconsin, which is perfect because they're so different. And one of the learnings we've had is how each state has a different policy construct, different requirements, and different players. And so what works for one state is not going to work for all of them. That is intuitive in one sense, but very challenging when you're trying to build a system that can be scaled. So, for example, Indiana is a state that has a very strong state footprint in an accountability framework. Actually, by the way, they just launched their new accountability framework after 2 years of work, which now includes a credential of value, work-based learning experience, and an emphasis on durable skills. So once that accountability structure was passed, now they're ready to think about, all right, how are we going to measure that in real time and make that part of our accountability system? Much like North Carolina has done, but in a very unique way. So Wisconsin, on the other hand, is very local control. And so the state SEA has been super involved in the partnership and the building the progressions I mentioned and helping call for the piloting of these tools. But ultimately, it's a district-led effort. And so we're working with districts to pilot the tools. And it goes back to my point previously that without districts, this is very, very challenging to implement. The other thing that we've learned is that is directly focused on your technology and AI question. Learners, young people are using tech and AI enhanced and game-based assessments all around their lives at school. They are some of the savviest people around technology that we know. And yet, schools are outdated. They don't have the technology. In some cases, they don't have the bandwidth. So even though states are really excited about the AI technology and the AI enhancements within assessment, implementing that is a different story. There are procurement hurdles. There are data privacy hurdles. There are just simply implementation and education hurdles and like helping rethink the grammar of school and helping think, okay, well, where do these assessments of durable skills go? Because they cut across content areas. So based on that, we've had to make some shifts. We are focusing on building some tools that are based on the content and then thread based on the academic content and thread the durable skills throughout. And so our model has shifted based on all the lessons we've learned from states. But the bottom line is it varies from state to state and district to district, and that has created real challenges, but amazing learnings and opportunities.
Thank you. Jack, we're going to do a permutation. We're kind of pivoting into lightning round, while also you and Pam will kind of get final questions. So as a reminder, the lightning round will be, what is one final thought or call to action you'd like to leave our audience with today? And I'm going to ask you to share that, as you also share a bit more about a shift towards measuring how people collaborate with AI and with each other in the era of AI.
So I think, I mean, maybe this isn't the right audience, but I feel like one of the things that I find myself talking to folks at work about all the time is not to be afraid. It feels like a lot of change coming at once. Some of us, learned how to do things a long time ago and thought we had figured it out, and all of a sudden everything seems to be changing. I feel like I can't start a conversation about some of these measurement issues, how you work with AI, how you collaborate now, without people thinking that I'm trying to index to see who doesn't get a job anymore. And it's like, slow down. We actually want to help you develop. We actually want to figure out how to use this technology. We've already invested a lot of time and money in you, and we want you to be here and be productive. And I think this has got to be true, for our teachers and for our students, as well as our employees, our workers and citizens, right? That there's a lot going on, but there's a lot of people working on it. I think if you can distance yourself from the hype that some of our, my tech friends are cranking out routinely, and focus on what's real, that there's actually a lot of things to be hopeful about. And there's a lot of really interesting things coming our way. And as long as we can, stay off of the doom side of things, I actually think we're going to be a lot more productive in good ways as long as we do this right.
My son gets a lot of hope with the thought of being able to give a text prompt that becomes a Roblox game world. Yes. So there
spend a lot of time and money on making
things
that
on the horizon. Pam, also a permutation. So what's one final thought or call to action you'd like to leave us with? And a question, what does it look like to finally tackle variation in student learning? And why is addressing variation so critical for measuring what matters?
Okay. Again, going to start with the second part of your question before the first. I want you to imagine when I was practicing as a doctor that different patients walked in hour after hour after hour. They were all different, and yet some of them had the same problem. And so when I think about that, I think about the fact that 60, 70, 80% of what I did was based on a fund of knowledge about what's true for all humans, what's true for all young people. But there's no question that there was a point at which I had to discern what was going on with this particular child. And then I started to have to customize in order to produce a solution for that child. So we now have the tools to do that. We have the tools to be able to have the knowledge base and do the customization. But let's just imagine I had an MRI in front of me, okay, that was telling me what this patient had. I'd still have to do what Jack just said. Okay, I would have to discern and use tools that I have intellectually to know how to present it, how to explain it, how to get that patient to follow up on whatever it was I would want them to do. There were a whole lot of things that had to surround what the tool gave to me. So I'm thrilled that we have better tools, but I'm thrilled because we are going to use them to honor human variation, honor context, and honor the human relationship.
Love it. Thank you. Brandy, in 30 or 45 seconds here, what's one final thought or call to action that you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, thank you. I just can't stress enough the importance of thinking about who is using the data to do what and to what end. More measurement, more data is great, but only to the extent that it can do that. And so as we sort of think about what technology affords us, what we can measure, being able to think about student skills in a different way, I think just always attending to how that information is being used.
Thank you. Laura, one final thought or call to action that you'd like to leave the audience with today? 45 seconds or so.
I'm glad that Jason put in the chat that system that you can't think critically about nothing. Really what we're talking about is an integration, not a replacement of academic skills, but a addition. So that's one call to action is let's not suddenly over rotate and forget all of the content knowledge. I guess I'll also pivot by saying assessment is a way of capturing information. It's one way, it's not the only way, and we should not be defined by, as young people or old people, a test score that doesn't take into account the context around us. So one of the promises of what we're all iterating towards is assessment that is more personalized, more focused on what you know and can do rather than the ways that you're failing and where you don't know things. And that's what we want to both support our learners and to, support human beings in general.
Thank you. So thank you, Laura, Brandy, Pam, Jack, for generously sharing your insights and your expertise and your passions with us today. Thank you all for spending this hour with us and for being a part of a growing community of educators and researchers committed to reimagining educational measurement and assessment to upgrade how we understand and design for quality and particularly usefulness and usability in the AI era. We hope today's discussion sparked ideas that you'll carry forward in your own practice, and we hope you'll stay in touch. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great week.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Eric.